Today, I want to talk about how to do podcast interviews. And this is both for whether you're going to be a podcast host or whether you're going to be a podcast guest. So, just diving right into it, what's your setup going to be? And what I mean by that, let's go down. If you're a podcast host, is where you're going to be recording your interviews. You could use Zoom, you could use Riverside, you could use StreamYard. There's any different number of platforms that you can have for your setup. And also along the lines with your setup, if you're going to be having guests on your show, how are they going to book your interview? It can be a nightmare sometimes when I'm talking to a host and they say, "Yeah, I'd love to have you on. What does your availability look like?" It's 10 times easier if you have a scheduling link to just send to me, or to have a guest to book on your show, or if you're a host to have guests book for you. And I just use Calendly. I know there's other scheduling tools out there, but I find Calendly works the best. I'm able to integrate where the interview is going to be on it, whether that's again on Zoom, Riverside, StreamYard, wherever that may be. So I make sure I have that set up in place. And then from there, I want to make sure I have a podcast mic, good quality podcast mic, run you 50, $100. I use the Blue Yeti. You can get the Blue Snowball. You can get the Audio Technica. Just go on Amazon, look up podcast mics. You should be able to find a good quality mic on there. You probably want a nice quality webcam. I have a nice quality webcam. On my end, I believe I bought off Amazon for $30. And then I also have a ring light as well that attaches to my desk in the background. Living in the Northeast, it's really not that sunny for a good part of the year. So I want to make sure I have that good ring light. So I have that nice setup ready get to go. And if you are a podcast guest, you probably want to have a nice webcam mic, a quality microphone, and the ring light. All in, probably about $150 to have a really good quality setup. So make sure you have that ready to go. The next one you want to have is a nice quality time to prepare for the interview, whether it's yourself going on an interview. If that's the case, check out the podcast, listen to a few episodes, get an understanding of how the podcast is going to go. If you're a host and you want to prep for your guest, see, what do they do? What's their background? Just different things like that so you know who you're going to be talking to. I find that if you're having a guest and you're introducing them on the podcast, you're going to want to go through and check out how to pronounce either their first name, their last name. Sometimes it might be a little different than what you actually expected. So you just want to make sure you go through and do that on your end and just spend your time preparing for your interview. And now that you're hopping into the interview, you want to be conversational, you want to be authentic. Everyone loves a story. No one wants to have you on their podcast just to hear you talk about why you're the best. If you're a real estate investor, why you're the best company. No one wants to listen to an infomercial. I mean, we see those on TV all the time. No one wants that. No one wants to be pushed hard on it. It's not a sales pitch. It's just you coming on and sharing your expertise. When I go on podcasts, I just talk about, here are the benefits of podcasting. Here's what you get out of it. Here's how you do it. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, the benefit of podcasting you and my company is to really save people time from going out there and trying to find podcasts and book themselves. So, I mean, I could teach anyone how to do it. It's whether or not you want to spend the time or train someone on your team to do it. So I like to tell stories. I like to be authentic and just like to be conversational with the host. I've interviewed folks on my podcast where I ask a simple question or a question per se, and they get back to me in a 15-second answer. And it's just going to be a drag on the interview. And not to say that you want to be talking as a guest for 10, 15 minutes or 5 minutes, maybe 2 to 3 minutes max. But again, just to be conversational and similar with the host. And this was something I struggled early on, was that I would interview people and I would prep really hard. I would have all these questions set out and I would only stick to the questions. And I would say to the guest, I would say this question and move on to the next question and then move on to the next question. Just go down my bullet point list. I found it was a little bit trickier to be conversational. There's just going to be points and times during the interview where something comes up that I just want to dig more into it. And it wasn't in my questions that I had laid out. So I just want to be conversational and authentic. The next aspect of it is being consistent. And I think this falls in line with also practicing as well. if you're a podcast host and you want to start off on a podcast, it can be a little scary from time to time and a little fearful if you've never done an interview before. And I remember when I had started a previous podcast, not this podcast, I had a gentleman on the show called John Gordon. He's a highly successful author and he has some great books, and I highly recommend checking him out. And I remember we just like butchered his name just like so bad. Not even his name, it's just his bio. That he had to tell us, okay, here's how you should be reading my bio. It was super embarrassing. I remember I interviewed an entrepreneur, Mike Dillard, a successful online entrepreneur. I forgot to hit the record button. And it was just not great, not ideal, not what you want to have. But that was just in the beginning until I had more consistency, until I practiced. And what I mean by practice is just doing more interviews, being consistent. Are you going to be interviewing 1 or 2 guests a week? Are you going to be going on 1 or 2 podcasts? Maybe not a week, but maybe 2 to 4 podcasts per month. What is that going to look like? And you just want to be consistent with that. And similar to being a guest within yourself, it could be uncomfortable for the first 5 or 10 interviews that you do going out there and being a podcast guest. What I did for me, and it was a 2 sort of pronged strategy. One, when I was first going on shows, I wouldn't go on the bigger shows. I wouldn't even go on the medium-sized shows. I would go on your smaller shows. And by what I mean by the smaller shows is I would search for podcasts that had, and the tools you can use are Listen Notes, Raphonic, number of tools out there where you can search shows. And I would filter by podcasts that had 5 to 15, maybe 10 to 15 episodes out there. So these are going to be your newer podcasts when I was just getting started. And I wanted to go on these shows just to get my story down, figure out what I was going to say, make sure I don't pause too often, make sure I don't say too much, just things where you're not doing interviews all the time and not being consistent with it are going to creep up. So that's why you want to keep practicing, because the last thing you want to do is go on a larger podcast and you don't have your story down, you're uncomfortable, and it just doesn't make for a good time. And you wasted that opportunity to really shine on one of these larger podcasts. And something that helped me out, not so much on the consistency side, but practicing, was taking a public speaking course. That was back when I was in college and I had my podcast then. And then a few years later, I wanted to continue to get better at it, going through Toastmasters and just trying to get better all around at public speaking, because it wasn't something that I was natural at. It wasn't something that I was used to. And I found that helped. So those are how to master the art of podcast interviews, how to do interviews, whether you're a host, whether you're a guest. And I hope everyone found that content very helpful today. And until next time, I hope everyone has a great day and a great rest of the week.